Imagine standing on a tee box, right? You're completely wired from head to toe with the most advanced 3D motion capture sensors on the planet,
Oh, it's
dude.
incredible tech.
Yeah, and all around you, you've got these high-speed cameras running at like 10,000 frames per second. And as you swing, AI algorithms they're processing your movement in real time.
Right, right.
We're no longer just looking at, a 2D video of your golf swing on a smartphone. We're looking into the very DNA of your biomechanics.
Absolutely. It's why
And hiding right there in the data is this single metric,
Yeah.
one that can predict a slice, a hook, or a pure strike before you even hit the ball. It's entirely redefining how coaching systems analyze performance, and it's known as the sway gap. Welcome to today's Deep Dives, where we are going to explore the absolute cutting edge of modern golf performance.
I mean, honestly, it sounds like science fiction, right?
Right.
But this level of biomechanical X-ray is the daily reality of elite performance analysis right now. And, sway gap, it might sound like this highly technical mathematical measurement,
Yeah.
but the physical reality of it is actually quite intuitive once you visualize the anatomy.
Okay, so paint that picture for us. What are we actually looking at?
So what the 3D systems are measuring is the side-to-side or lateral separation between two very specific points at any given millisecond of the swing,
Okay.
but paying special attention to the moment right before impact. And those 2 points are the center of your pelvis, so essentially your belt buckle, and the center of your upper torso, which is, your chest or sternum.
Got it. So we are mapping the relationship between the upper body and the lower body.
Exactly.
Think of it like a structural tilt indicator for a launch pad.
Do I like that?
Right. If your pelvis slides forward toward the target, but your chest stays back behind the golf ball, the lateral gap between those 2 points stretches out. The launch pad is basically tilting backward.
Right.
But if your chest stays stacked directly over your pelvis, perfectly vertical, that gap shrinks to almost zero.
That launch pad visualization maps perfectly to the physics of the collision, actually, because sway gap is just a real-time proxy for how much your torso is angled relative to your pelvis in the lateral direction.
Right.
And the reason modern biomechanists are so obsessed with this metric is because the orientation of that launch pad, it dictates the entire framework of the swing.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it controls the geometry of how the golf club approaches the ground, how it interacts with the turf, and ultimately how energy is transferred to the ball.
Okay, so if the sway gap acts as the structural foundation for the swing, it makes sense that any slight alteration would have, massive ripple effects.
Oh, huge.
Let's look at the underlying mechanics, starting with the bottom of the swing arc. Because if I'm, hitting the ground 3 inches behind the ball or catching it skull thin, that implies the anchor point of my swing is shifting around.
Yes.
How does the relationship between the chest and the pelvis actually lock in that low point?
Well, the golf swing is, at its core, it's a high-speed circle moving around your body, right?
Yeah.
And that circle has a bottom point. Anatomically, the lowest point of your swing arc is almost entirely governed by the position of your sternum and your lead shoulder.
Okay.
So if you have a functional amount of sway gap, meaning your pelvis has shifted slightly toward a target to transfer weight, while your head and upper torso remain centered or slightly behind the ball, you create this incredibly stable axis.
So you're anchored.
Exactly, you're anchored. This separation allows the lower body to generate power while keeping the upper body's center of mass totally stable through the violence of contact.
Yeah, it's a violent collision.
It is, and this ensures the club returns consistently to the back of the golf ball before it even touches the turf.
So if the anchor point of the swing shifts because my torso moves, does that also change the actual angle the club approaches the ball?
Yes.
Because it feels like if my chest tilts backward or shifts forward, my arms have to swing on a completely different 3D plane?
They have absolutely no choice but to change planes.
Yeah.
I mean, the tilt of your torso and your lateral organization, they literally force your arms into specific movement patterns. This is where sway gap alters the entire orientation of that swing circle.
Okay.
It directly influences whether your attack angle into the ball is steep, chopping down vertically, or shallow, kind of sweeping in horizontally.
Right, right.
And it dictates whether the club path is coming from the inside, so close to your body, or cutting across from the outside. And crucially, it controls dynamic loft.
Which is the actual loft delivered at impact, right? Not just the number stamped on the club.
Exactly, at that exact millisecond of impact.
Okay, so the sway gap is essentially the steering wheel for the swing's geometry.
It really is.
Which brings up a really interesting point from the research regarding direction bias. The data suggests that sway gap strongly influences rotation and swing arc orientation, creating repeatable push or pull tendencies.
Yes.
But I want to push back on this for a second because I think it's an easy trap to fall into. Sway gap doesn't actually, aim the club face itself, right? Because if my club face is pointing dead right, it doesn't matter what my pelvis is doing, the ball is going right.
That is a vital distinction to make. You're completely right. No, sway gap does not aim the club face.
Right.
Your grip, your wrists, your forearm rotation, those are largely responsible for the face angle. What sway gap does is set up the swing arc's overall path.
Okay.
Think of it like laying down train tracks. Sway gap dictates whether those train tracks are pointing to the right of the target, dead straight, or to the left of the target.
Got it.
So assuming your club face control is relatively stable, the orientation of those tracks is going to create a very specific, predictable directional pattern.
So if the tracks are pointed out to the right because of how my body is tilted and my face is square to the target line, I'm hitting a block or a push.
Precisely.
Okay, I'm starting to see why modern coaching systems are just obsessed with this.
Sure.
But let's take this out of the laboratory and put it on the driving range.
Let's do it.
I've seen guys on the range whose hips spin out so far ahead of their chest, they look like they're doing the limbo.
Oh, we all have.
Right. I imagine trying to hit a golf ball from that position creates a massive timing issue. What is physically happening when a player has, quote-unquote, too much sway gap?
When you see that massive lateral separation, so the pelvis is significantly targetward and the chest is hanging way back, you are watching a biomechanical engine stall.
Stall.
Yeah. If your pelvis is 5 inches toward the target and your chest is 2 inches behind the ball, your spine goes into massive lateral flexion. You are bending backward aggressively.
Ouch.
Right? And when you do that, the facet joints in your lower back essentially lock up. The hips literally cannot continue to rotate efficiently because the skeletal structure is binding.
Wow. And when the body stops turning, that momentum has to go somewhere. The energy doesn't just disappear.
Exactly right. The momentum transfers rapidly out to the extremities.
Hey.
Yes. Because the rotational engine has stalled, the hands and arms are forced to take over. The wrists unhinge early, trying to send the club head past the hands to, save the strike.
Right.
We call this a flip. And because you are flipping at the ball with your hands, the bottom of the arc becomes completely unpredictable.
It's like cracking a whip.
Oh, yeah.
If your hand representing the pelvis snaps forward, but the chest pulls back perfectly in sequence, you get this massive focused acceleration at the tip of the whip.
Beautiful analogy.
But if that sequence is off by even a millisecond, the whip just tangles up on itself, you lose all the kinetic energy, and you probably hit yourself in the leg.
That is a highly accurate representation of the kinetic chain. Directionally, for a right-handed player whose chest is hanging back in that limbo position, the swing arc is oriented way out to the right.
Okay.
So this creates a massive push or block bias. And from a contact standpoint, because the upper body is effectively backing away from the ball late in the downswing, the club starts ascending too early.
So you're pulling up.
Exactly. You see a nasty drift toward thin strikes, catching the ball on the leading edge of the club, or hitting it incredibly high on the face with the irons.
I understand the physics of the breakdown, but I watch golf on TV on the weekends, and there are some superhuman professionals out there who have huge separation.
Oh, absolutely.
Their pelvis is miles ahead of their chest, their spine is tilted back, and they are out there winning majors and hitting the ball 320 yards. How do they survive that position?
They survive it and, honestly, even thrive in it through sheer athletic compensation and world-class biomechanical discipline.
Okay.
For those elite players, larger separation is actually a superpower. But here's how they do it. They possess the immense core strength and flexibility required to preserve the dynamics of that spine angle without their joints locking up.
So they just keep turning.
They keep turning to the shot. When you combine that continuous rotation with incredibly disciplined, quiet hands, meaning they don't flip the club face, that massive separation creates upward strike conditions and ridiculous clubhead speed.
But the timing requirement for that must be microscopic.
Oh, it is.
Like if their rotation slows down by a fraction of a second, the club face is going to flip, and that beautiful, powerful draw turns into a terrifying two-way miss.
They are living on a knife edge of timing. It is a high-reward, high-risk way to swing a golf club.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at the other extreme, which is perhaps the most common trap for amateur players trying to understand the game.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
What happens anatomically when a player has almost no sway gap? The chest stays completely stacked directly over the pelvis as they approach impact.
Well, if the chest and pelvis are perfectly vertical, the upper body has no room to tilt away from the target. The center of mass is sitting right on top of the golf ball, so where do the arms go?
Right.
They can't swing from the inside because the body is literally in the way.
Precisely. Because the torso is stacked and the sternum is pushed ahead of the ideal center point, the right shoulder is forced high and outward toward the ball.
Oh.
Biomechanically, your arms have no choice but to throw the club outside the ideal plane. They work outward and downward. This is the anatomical root cause of the classic, dreaded over-the-top swing.
The move that plagues millions of golfers. So the lack of a sway gap is forcing the body to chop down like an axe.
It radically steepens the delivery of the club. Because the chest stays on top of the ball, the swing direction shifts violently to the left for a right-handed golfer.
Okay.
The club cuts aggressively across the golf ball, creating a pull directly to the left, or if the face is open, a nasty, weak pull slice.
So if we look at the self-diagnosis for the listener, this is going to show up in the turf interaction, right?
Yes, very clearly.
If you're listening right now and your divots are pointing way left of your target and they look like deep bomb craters, your sway gap is likely too small. Your chest is dominating the downswing.
That is a perfect self-diagnostic tool. The low point becomes a total disaster when you are that steep.
Yeah.
If your pelvis never moves forward to create separation, the low point stays too far back. You hit the ground before the ball, resulting in those heavy fat shots.
Or the opposite, right?
Right, because your brain is incredibly smart. It senses that you are about to bury the club head into the earth, so you instinctively stand up late in the downswing to make room, and you hit it skull thin.
Wow.
Furthermore, swinging with a stacked torso causes a massive power leak. Without that lateral stretch, you cannot create efficient ground-up sequencing. You end up swinging entirely with the muscles in your arms and shoulders, completely losing out on the free energy that the lower body provides.
But just like the previous extreme, the sources note an exception here too. There are players on tour who look incredibly quiet laterally.
Sure.
They have a very small sway gap. They look entirely stacked over the ball, yet they compress the life out of it and hit it miles. How are they defying the steepness trap?
This is where 3D pressure mapping technology, literally force plates under the golfer's feet, has blown the lid off traditional coaching. These elite players might look laterally quiet, but they are utilizing vertical ground reaction forces. Instead of sliding laterally to create speed, they are pushing straight down into the turf, which forces the ground to push straight back up.
So they're pushing off the ground.
They are essentially jumping. This violent upward extension clears the hips out of the way and shallows the golf club, even without a large lateral sway gap. They create speed vertically rather than laterally.
Wow.
But again, it is an incredibly precise way to play that demands absolute control of your delivery and immense lower body power.
That perfectly bridges the gap between biomechanical theory and practical application. Because the perfect sway gap isn't just one static, magical number that you lock in for every shot.
No, not at all.
Based on the 3D data, it has to adapt dynamically. The ball position changes, the required attack angle changes, the spin windows change. So the sway gap you need changes entirely depending on the weapon you have in your hand.
Absolutely.
Let's do a bag breakdown for the listener, starting with the longest club. What is the sway gap requirement for the driver?
The driver presents an entirely unique biomechanical task compared to an iron. What are we trying to produce? A stable strike, with the ball positioned very far forward in your stance.
Right.
To maximize the launch window and reduce backspin, we generally want a neutral or slightly upward attack angle.
Yeah.
Because the ball is so far forward, the driver demands a highly functional, slightly larger amount of sway gap.
Okay, so more separation.
Yes, you need the pelvis forward to support the weight transfer, but the chest absolutely must stay tilted back behind the ball to allow the club head to reach the bottom of its arc early and catch the ball in the upswing.
The launch pad has to tilt back for the rocket to go up.
Perfect way to say it.
But we know the extremes are dangerous. If that driver gap gets too big, we're back to that limbo position.
Right. If the chest hangs back too long, rotation stalls. You get those volatile push blocks to the right.
Yeah.
The timing becomes a nightmare. You might absolutely bomb one drive perfectly down the middle and then completely lose the club face on the next tee box. Furthermore, because the upper body backs away so severely, the strike point often moves high on the driver face, leading to those pop-ups.
And what happens if the sway gap is too small with the driver? Like if the listener is staying totally stacked and trying to hit the driver like a 9-iron?
It is an absolute launch window killer.
Oof.
A small gap with the chest forward creates a steeper descending attack angle. You end up hitting down on the driver. The contact shifts low on the face.
And that spins it, right?
Exactly. When you hit a driver low on the face, the gear effect causes the backspin to climb astronomically. Instead of 2,000 RPMs of spin, you're at 4,000.
Wow.
The ball balloons into the air, the direction skews left into a pull or a slice because the club is cutting across the ball, and you completely lose the aerodynamic advantage that a massive, modern driver head is engineered to reward.
Okay, so the driver needs a healthy gap to support the upward strike, but we can't overdo it. Moving down the bag, we get into the long irons, the 2, 3, 4, and 5 irons, or even the stronger hybrids.
Right.
These clubs are notoriously unforgiving for the average player. Why does sway gap matter so much here?
Long irons are brutal because they have very little static loft to hide behind. You cannot rely on the club face to elevate the ball.
Right.
You are trying to produce precise ball-first contact with a low point that is just slightly forward of the ball, creating a downward attack angle, but not nearly as steep as a wedge.
Yeah.
Because of these tight margins, long irons demand highly organized, moderate separation. You need the pelvis to lead, but the chest must follow closely.
The margin for error on the low point is practically zero. If you're a fraction of an inch off with a 4-iron, the shot is dead.
Exactly. If your sway gap is too big with a long iron, the chest escapes backward. The anchor point shifts away from the target, the low point drifts forward and up, and the club bottoms out too early.
So you top it or thin it.
Yes. You cannot compress the golf ball. You sweep it, the strike is thin, and the direction drifts into a weak push that falls short of the green.
And if the gap is too small and the chest stays forward,
Then you encounter that severe steepness we discussed. You get heart-heel digs into the turf, the club grabs, you hit fat shots, or the club cuts across the ball, producing a weak, floaty slice that loses 20 to 30 yards of distance.
which brings us to the core of the bag, the mid-irons, the 6, 7, and 8 irons. The biomechanical sources call this category the ultimate truth detector. Why do these specific clubs reveal the reality of your swing?
Because mid-irons perfectly expose whether your sway gap is actually creating a stable environment for compression, or if you are relying on frantic last second-hand compensations to make contact. With a mid-iron, iron dispersion is mostly about start line management. You need a highly predictable start line and a stable low point just ahead of the ball. The mid-iron doesn't have the sweeping leniency of a driver, nor the heavy descending blow of a wedge. It requires biomechanical harmony.
Let's do another quick self-diagnosis for the listener on the course. If someone is out playing and they have that one 7-iron that randomly just goes dead-like, it floats weakly in the air, drifts right, doesn't compress, and comes up a full club short, is that a symptom of too much sway gap where the chest is hanging back?
That is textbook. That weak floating fade is exactly how the hangback tendency manifests with a mid-iron.
Interesting.
When the gap is too big and the chest is behind the bowl, the hands flip to save it. When the hands flip, you dynamically add loft to the 7-iron at impact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you essentially turn your 7-iron into a 9-iron. The start line pushes right, the spin goes up, and you get that floating dead launch that gets eaten alive by the wind.
And the other side?
Conversely, if your sway gap is too small with the mid-iron, you're going to see pulled shots, incredibly steep, deep divots, and fat contact because the chest stayed too centered and forced the arms to chop down.
The mid-iron never lies. All right, let's look at the final section of the bag, the scoring clubs. Your 9-iron, pitching wedge, and the specialty wedges gap, sand, and lob. Down here, consistency and stable low points absolutely beat power. I mean, no one is trying to swing a lob wedge at 110 miles an hour.
And because power is not the objective, wedges actually punish sway gap extremes more than any other club.
Really?
They demand highly controlled, minimal separation. You want a much more stacked feeling to ensure the club descends crisply into the back of the ball. If your gap is too big with a wedge, if your pelvis slides way forward and your upper body falls backward, you lose control of the bottom of the arc entirely.
And losing the bottom of the arc with a wedge is how you get the terrifying thin flyer that rockets 30 yards over the green and into the parking lot.
Yes, or you get a completely unpredictable launch or a low-spin knuckleball because the strike floats up the club face.
Yeah.
Partial wedge shots, like a 50-yard pitch, become completely unreliable because a massive sway gap makes the movement pattern far too reliant on split-second hand timing.
But you still can't be perfectly stacked. right? If the sway gap is too small, even with a wedge, the sternum gets ahead of the ball.
And that leads to the classic wedge miss,
Hmm.
the heavy chunk. The low point shifts inches behind the golf ball because the upper body dominated the movement and forced the angle of attack to become violently steep.
Right.
Or you get a steep trap move that creates massive crater-like divots, pulling the ball way left. Wedges require just enough lateral separation to avoid those steep pulls, but not so much that you lose the low point and back away from the strike.
Looking at the entire picture, from the driver down to the log wedge, it really drives home the reality of modern performance analysis. What is the ultimate truth we are pulling from this deep dive? It seems clear that sway gap is not just some trophy number to brag about on a high-tech simulator. I mean, no one is winning a medal for having 25 degrees of lateral separation.
Not at all. And
Right.
that is the crucial takeaway for anyone looking to understand their biomechanics. Sway gap is purely a relationship metric. It is completely neutral until you look at its effects. It only becomes good or bad based on what it is physically doing to your low point, your start line, your strike pattern, and your ability to repeat that movement under the pressure of speed. It is a diagnostic tool designed to uncover the root cause of your ball flight, not a high score to chase.
It's a structural readout. It has to match the specific shot you are trying to execute. Now, if you enjoy the content we provide every day, please subscribe to our channel. And if you have topics, research ideas, technologies, golf systems, biomechanics concepts, coaching questions, or industry developments that you would like us to investigate and transform into a future deep dive, please send us an email with your idea. We will research the topic and create a special deep dive dedicated to it.
And as we wrap up this exploration into the modern swing, I'm going to leave you with a final thought to mull over, especially as we consider the future of on-course performance analysis. We've established that the optimal sway gap demands incredibly precise, dynamic separation between your torso and pelvis, and that it must be perfectly tailored to every single club in your bag.
Right.
So ask yourself this. How does sheer physical fatigue on the 18th hole silently alter your body's mechanical ability to maintain that exact structural relationship compared to when you were fresh, flexible, and completely energized on the first tee?
Does your launch pad silently start to crumble when your core is tired? It's a fascinating question, and one that might just explain that unexpected slice on the final fairway. Keep swinging, keep analyzing the data, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.